People ask first, is common sense a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to getting the message out? Do people overanalyze now to the point where if it's so simple, it can't be real?
I think it's more that if it's so simple, you think it can't work. And I think when people see a title like this book, right, you can't screw this up, it almost feels gimmicky, or like the common response I get is like, oh, trust me, I can screw this up, right? And the idea is when you are trying to become healthier, and it doesn't matter if you're trying to become Mr. Olympia or you're trying to gain 10 pounds of muscle or lose 10 pounds of fat, right? The principles, the foundations of what allow us to build behaviors that become unbreakable are the same, right? Like it's these habits. And most people look at the goal, they look at the vision, and they don't look at what it takes to create habit. And they don't understand what derails a habit. And what derails a habit is not these super simple, very small mistakes, which we tend to blow out of proportion. And that's the problem within health and fitness. We skip a workout, we eat dessert, and then we overreact, which then fundamentally disrupts this idea of these healthy behaviors that then can guide us on the path that we want. So yeah, I think simple's overlooked. It's something I talk about in the book, right? Our brains reward us for things that are novel and new. We light up, we get excited, we are more likely to buy into the craziest shit that we hear. Does that mean that none of that crazy shit works? No, but it also means the stuff that is most likely to serve us well is also the stuff that we're most likely to ignore.
How hard is it to unwire people?
Right? It's a mind game. And the mind game starts by understanding that like the healthiest people in the world do not go on these roller coasters, right? So when you think about what you are going to do, like consistency wins the day with everything, right? And there is nothing consistent about like if I overeat on something or mindlessly snack to then overreact, right? The correction to something that is an overreaction is not another overreaction. So it is hard to unwind. But when we zoom out from nutrition and fitness and we see our behaviors in other areas, we tend to not do these, I would say, uncharacteristic overreactions. And what I mean by that is, if we're at work and we don't have our best work day ever, we don't suddenly think that we are fundamentally incapable of doing this and work twice as many hours the next day, right? We can contextualize it and understand that like there are things that we can do better. So the way that you break through is you start looking at other areas of your life. So much of this book is really about behavioral science, right? Someone told me that I could call this the psychology of eating, because, with food, with nutrition, with personal developments, we tend to break all of the rules that we very easily apply in other walks of life. So how do we break free of this? We would apply what we are doing to other scenarios. And typically we would see how batshit crazy that would be. And then you can contextualize it in a game of percentages, right? If the average person eats 21 meals in a week, right? 7 days a week, 3 meals per day. And that's on average. A lot of people snack and eat throughout. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 meals that are not aligned with what you want, but the rest are pretty much on point, you're going to be 80 to 90% compliant. And if you look at that almost in every walk of life where you are 80, 90% good enough, you're freaking great. In sports, right? If you're a 65% passer, you're a Pro Bowl quarterback. In baseball, if you're a 300 hitter, you're the best in the game. But in nutrition, we act like we have to be 100% of the time. And I say this not just coming from a behavioral standpoint. I say this working with the highest level athletes. I say this working with like supermodels. I say this working with, who many consider the greatest bodybuilder of all time, Arnold Schwarzenegger. None of these people apply this black and white thinking. So part of breaking free from this cycle, which is really hard to do, is looking outside of your day-to-day life of how you react and look at how you would do this otherwise and what other people are doing to see that there's a different way. And it doesn't have to be this, I call it the dieting cycle of hell, right? Where it's like you start a diet, you restrict something, you see a little bit of results, The results stop. You restrict even more. The results grind to a halt. You restrict even more. You become freaking miserable. You binge on everything. You say, fuck it. And then like all hell breaks loose. And then eventually you start over again. But these perpetuating cycles, we just want to put to an end.
So who's to blame for all this?
I don't think there's one single factor, right? There isn't such thing as a magic bullet. It would be unfair to say there is one thing that causes us to lose control of our eating, right? Our food environment is pretty messed up. Our food environment is fundamentally stacked against us. But as I talk about in the book, most diets try to teach you how to fight against a food environment, or we're waiting for the food environment to change. It's not going to change, right? That is like pushing a massive boulder up a hill. We have to learn how to coexist with the food environment, or else it will crush us. And that's what typically happens to people. If we tell people they can never eat takeout, if they tell them we can never eat dessert, if we tell them we never touch sugar, this is what we tell most people. And it's not to say it can't work for some people, but for the vast majority, it does not work. And research shows this. There was a study in the journal Appetite where for one day only, they told people to restrict certain foods. And what happened? They ate 133% more of those foods. Because us as human creatures, we want what we can't have. And there are certain people with certain personality traits that are best served by that. Yes, but the vast majority of us, again, to build these habits that allow us to succeed, we can't go to the extremes. Part of the problem, whether I like it or not, and I've been a part of this industry, is the wellness industry, right? The wellness industry, I think, is fundamentally designed for good. But as time has gone on, the wellness industry has become massive and is pushed more towards extremes. And there's a reason why these extremes work, because it gets people to buy in and keep on buying in, right? If we break people a little bit and we give them a little bit of short-term success, but long-term failure, right? Go on something that is so difficult to sustain that you can't sustain it. But during that short period of time you saw success, you'll keep on buying in over and over and over again. So the food environment is a problem. I think the wellness industry, not everyone, but a lot of the wellness industry that is selling a quick fix rather than, right, it's a Band-Aid, and we're putting Band-Aids over bullet holes, right? Like it's not going to stop it. We got to stop being suckered into this, like, hey, I've been eating like terrible for 4 or 5 years, or I can't exercise. Here's a 4-week plan that's going to fix everything. That's not realistic. We all want to believe it, but like that's actually a sign that the plan is probably going to stop working within a short period of time. That's not like the end point. The end point isn't to do this for 4 weeks. The end point is like, how do I make this feel automatic so it's easier, right? Like most people start a plan and they hate it. They're like counting the days till this thing is over. And instead, I think, the better way is like, how can I make a lot of these things that I want to do easier so that I feel better, I look better, I see changes. And if I want to add new habits, if I want to make it more challenging, if I want to lift more weights or train more often or get more dialed in with my diet, I am in a better position to succeed. So I talk about in the book that I learned from famous trainer Alan Cosgrove, you don't want to shoot a cannon from a canoe. And we are constantly putting cannons on canoes. And what that means is we are giving people tactics that can potentially help them, but we're not doing it from a stable base of which like we are in control of our behavior. We're just on a canoe hoping that if we cut out all sugar, or hoping if we start intermittent fasting, or hoping if we start training 6 days a week when we've been training none or training 3, that it's suddenly going to like blast off and it's going to work. And like fundamentally, it really doesn't make sense. So how do we put people in a position is instead of a canoe, you build a freaking battleship, right? You build these behaviors, you build these routines that make it really easy for you to add more complication. The goal isn't just to make it easy. The goal is to make you better, right? The goal is to make it easier to be better, easier to become consistent, easier to feel mastery. And you just got to ask yourself, like, am I at a stable enough place where I can add these really complicated behaviors, or do I just need something that allows me to take on these new tasks?
So with that, what's a step one starting point? I mean, there's not a one size fit all, but if you were to say from the book, we all have to start from somewhere, what would be your step one that can probably cover most ground?
I think there's a lot of step ones. The idea is, I provide 5 different tools in the book. And the idea is, right, like this is an Arnold thing that I've taken and borrowed from Arnold, right? Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Most people, when they think they can't do all 5 tools, they kind of throw up their hands and feel like I can't do it. No, like any of these tools can serve you at any point. And sometimes 1 tool is enough. Sometimes 5 tools are needed. A place that I would start for people, and is a little bit of a pivot on an idea that's gained popularity, is intermittent fasting has become really popular, right, over the last decade. I wrote a best-selling book in 2013 about intermittent fasting, which was, that was 10 years ago. And a lot of my beliefs about intermittent fasting have shifted because a lot of what I thought was wrong. It was just too early. And it's not to say intermittent fasting can't help some people. It's just a lot of the claims are overblown. But there is something about intermittent fasting that you can apply in a different way, in a more sustainable way, that can be very helpful for people, because something that makes it difficult for people is that there are no boundaries on when they eat. So I don't care about a fasting or a non-fasting window, because I think a lot of that stuff, again, is overstated, whether it's the autophagy or the dopamine that you get or how it restricts calories. Research has done a pretty good job now of comparing intermittent fasting to non-intermittent fasting, and you really don't see a difference from weight loss. And when it comes to muscle gain, intermittent fasting tends to be inferior to non-intermittent fasting because the amount that you need to provide your body with protein. But what intermittent fasting does a really good job of is it helps you not get in your own way. So instead of thinking about a fasting window, I like to think about an open kitchen or closed kitchen. So at a certain time of day, you will start eating. I don't care when it is, from like when you wake up. And at a certain time of day, you will stop eating. And those are the boundaries. We know from psychology, we know from behavioral change, boundaries help people feel in control and feel safe. And the more stable you feel, the easier it is to change. So instead of worrying about whether you got to fast for 20 hours or 8 hours, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is open kitchen, closed kitchen. And there was a fantastic study where they told people just to move up their breakfast by an hour and a half, move up their dinner by an hour and a half, and they asked them to change nothing else. So it didn't matter when they had dinner, didn't matter when they had breakfast. They just moved it up an hour and a half and moved it back an hour and a half from they typically could, and they weren't able to eat outside that. And without changing anything else, without worrying about macros or anything else, people lost weight and then they kept it off, right? Because like it just wasn't this mindless eating or no boundaries. So much of these tools are about creating boundaries, creating confines. Another one of the tools is about just, you can tell people you can choose to eat more carbs or you can choose to eat more fat. We like to put these things in opposition, but we know by now, like a low fat diet or a low carb diet, they can both work. Yeah, they've put them head to head and it's almost identical. When they put them head to head over a year-long period, I think the low carb dieters lost 0.21 pounds per week and the low fat dieters lost 0.25 pounds per week. So you're talking about 4/100ths of a pound of a difference. In other words, it doesn't freaking matter. So people should choose whether they like carbs or fat. And if you like carbs, eat more carbs and eat less fat. If you like fat, eat more carbs, or eat more fat, eat less carbs. And the foundation of your plate is protein and fiber, because as you lose weight, your hunger goes up, right? Your hormones change as you lose weight to fundamentally make you hungrier. That's why the body is kind of like anchored against us. But if you protein and fiber, what it does is it sends a signal to your brain to really create more satisfaction so that people are less likely to have those changes that push them towards food. So that's two tools right there that will serve most people. If you build your plate around protein and fiber and then decide if you want to add carbs or fat, and if you create boundaries on your day, it makes it easier to determine how much you need to eat rather than stressing as much about like the time of day, how many meals, anything along those
I
lines.
had that written here. Do you mention it? How much of an enemy is that search for perfection? I can't get that out. Like, how much is that search? The search for perfection. How much is that like a detriment to everyone? Is once you get off that perfection cycle, everything seems to go downhill.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, right? And again, we act like we need to be perfect in order to be healthy. The message that most people are sold of what it takes to be healthy is very much misaligned. Now, again, if you want to be the world's greatest bodybuilder, there's a certain level of sacrifice that comes to it, but that doesn't happen overnight, right? So many people who are sharing these plans, they have the curse of knowledge, right? And what I mean by that is the things that people do now when they get to a certain level of health is not where they started. And if they started with where they were now, they would have never achieved that level of health. So many of us are trying to push towards this idea of perfection, which again, like we are programmed that if we fall short of that perfection to get in this, you can't screw it up mindset. And that's why the whole point is that like when you get to that point where you fail, one of two things happen, and both of them lead typically nowhere good. One, you say, screw it. I screwed up. Like, I made this big mistake. I cannot bounce back from this. And you stop exercising, you stop being as healthy. Some very smart individual, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, makes the analogy that people get in this mindset where it'd be like if you had a flat tire, you would then go and slash the other 3 tires. Makes no sense, but this is what we do. We self-sabotage. The other is when you feel like you screw up, we overcompensate. We detox. We do exactly what you said. I ate too many pistachios and like, I'm not going to eat my next meal, right? And the next day they feel like they have to fast. So they have to work out twice as more. And what happens is like, these are maladaptive behaviors that are the opposite of consistency and sustainability that then erode your ability to succeed. And then you still end up in that, like, I've completely screwed up mindset, as opposed to realizing that our bodies are incredibly resilient, just like our minds. The only thing that can break our resilience is repeatedly thinking that we screwed up and doing things that we know do not serve us best. So by striving for perfection, we put ourselves in a position where we anticipate screw ups to throw us off course, and then we allow those repeated perceptions of screw ups to continually chip away at our resilience instead of realizing no one's going to be perfect. It'd be great if you could cook all of your meals at home. It's not going to happen. It'd be great if you could never miss a workout. It's not going to happen. And it might not be from your choice. There could be a family emergency. You could get sick, right? Like, these things are planned parts of the journey. And when you learn to see these little bumps in the road as part of the road, rather than an obstacle, it changes everything. I like to reference a lot of things in the book that are outside of fitness and nutrition. I talk about stoicism and the idea of the obstacle is the way. And learning to see the obstacle as part of the journey helps you not be thrown off by these obstacles that are completely normal. So when we step away from this perfection, it allows us to be more consistent. When we can be more consistent, we can be more sustainable. Be more sustainable, we see more results. See more results, you build more confidence. You build more confidence, you have more motivation. You have more motivation, you can start taking on more difficult things and start abandoning the things that no longer serve you. And like, that's the idea. When you don't think you can screw up, when you realize that you can absorb, adapt, and be resilient to these things, you realize that these small little things, really, that they're not a big deal. And if you act like they're not a big deal, that's truly when you unlock success.
With that as well, how do you separate, I guess, the common sense from everything that you're going to see on social media? Like, how do you separate the two now? Because if I'm reading the book here, and I'm going to go order fast food later today, and then I read something on Instagram or 3 other things where, hey, this A, B, and C, and D are going to happen to you. How do I fight the urge now to say, this can't be right, I got to listen to them?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has to choose who they want to follow, and you should ask yourself what you want your life to look like, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all plan to health. But if you enjoy food, or you like food, or you have guilt having food, following someone who fundamentally makes you feel guilty about those foods, it's not a good fit, right? Like, picking a diet plan and picking a workout is no different than any other relationship. There has to be alignment. You have to be on the same page. People get upset sometimes. I'm a little bit agnostic when it comes to diet because I know so many different things can work. But I don't say that because, like, I'm trying to mislead people. I say it because, one, the research shows it, right? Like, there was a crazy study years ago, New England Journal of Medicine, one of the premier journals, did like the diet Super Bowl, right? It's comparing like vegan to Weight Watchers to Zone to low carb to low fat. And it's like, which one gets the best results? And they all got the same results, just pending what people were able to follow for the longest period of time. So, like, lots of stuff works, but what works the best is what you follow for the longest period of time, because consistent behaviors deliver consistent results, right? If you work out once per week and they're crazy grueling workouts, but it's once per week, you're probably not going to get as good of results as someone who's working out 3 to 4 times per week consistently over the course of the year. It doesn't matter how crazy the workouts are. It's just, you're putting in the reps. So if you're listening to someone, they give you the bright, shiny object, right? The question is, like, how does that sound for you like a year or 2 from now? I like to I take things out of nutrition because we get so freaking crazy about nutrition that if you know that you're going to be a business partner with someone and you kind of fucking hate their guts, but like you think you might like make a lot of money, maybe, that's probably going to blow up in your face, because like the distaste, the distrust, and the foundation of the relationship isn't good where it's not going to sustain. Diet is no different. right? And you have to understand, like, what do I want my life to look like? What can I fundamentally sustain? And that doesn't mean that you just look for the easy button, right? Change is hard. But change should be a process where, like, the first thing you do doesn't feel like you don't know how to swim and you're jumping into the deep end. We need to kind of meet people where they are. And then it's just a matter of, you kind of get a sense of what you want your life to look like. And you ask what the people are doing. And the one thing I will say is, all this information that you are reading and listening to, are they talking to you from a standpoint of trying to help you, or are they talking to you from a standpoint from trying to scare you? The strongest marketing trigger that we know of are two emotions: fear and greed. And they're very effective. It's very easy to scare someone with certain principles or ideas. And if that is how someone is leading you, trying to scare the crap out of you, it doesn't mean it's all bad, but it's usually a bit of a red flag, because you can teach someone how to be better. You can show them a different way without preying on an emotion that gets them more likely to act. And I don't think people should live in fear of their health, because that puts them in the wrong mindset. That pushes them more likely towards getting in that perfectionist mindset that we know is maladaptive, that we know makes it harder to make behaviors. So you don't have to follow me. I am not, the advice I give is not for everyone. I would say that the tools are evergreen, because the tools do not care if you're vegan or carnivore, right? The tools are there to serve you based on your dietary preferences. The mindset is designed to make you stronger. So no matter what your goal is, you can not be a prisoner of your own making. Health is something that is the most important investment. Base my life on it. I've been committed to it for 20 years, but I do get tired at some point of, in the attempt to become healthier, people breaking down mentally rather than being built up mentally. So make sure that you find the person who is aligned with you. Make sure that when you think about a year from now, is this something that I can sustain, or does it sound miserable? And if they're just preying on your fear, take a pause and ask, why is that? Is it they want to help me, or is it they're trying to sell me something?
What was the last time you were hooked, almost hooked, or almost lured by a fad, a too good to be true?
It has been a while, but I've made every mistake possible. I think the last time was probably, and caused me to take a pause, right? I have written a lot of books, but I have not written a book in almost 10 years. And I stopped after my last book, my best-selling book I've ever done on my own, which was all about, as I mentioned, about intermittent fasting, because about a year or two after, I see all these people burning out on this plan, which I thought at the time was really good. And there's a lot of things in there that I'm proud of, but the approach I took was wrong, right? I was wrong in some things, and that's a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling to try and help people and think you got it right and realize you got it wrong. And there were a couple of things that were wrong. One, I pushed people too far into extremes. Like, the first phase was so extreme, right? It was like this no carb approach, or even from a physiology standpoint, like, I didn't give people a position to continue making progress. And what I mean by that is, if you cut out all carbs and then, like, people's progress stalls, you kind of run out of things to remove, right? If you literally have people at 0 carbs and their weight loss stalls, you're going to start pulling away protein, you start pulling away fat, you're going to start getting so low on calories, where it's like, the idea of helping people lose weight is actually to teach them to eat as much as possible and still lose weight, so that when they hit that plateau, which is inevitable, you have things that you can adjust. So I got people in this perfectionist mindset, and I saw people burn out, and I made claims that at the time, based on a very small amount of research, I thought was true about intermittent fasting, and it wasn't. So I wanted to step back and be like, you know what? I don't want to play in the fad game. I don't want to push people towards extremes. I don't want people to think they have to be so perfect, and I don't want to create a plan that doesn't give people enough flexibility, that pending their own personal preferences, their own lifestyle, there isn't a little bit of adaptability. Because if there's one thing we know, it's that the personalization of health is like where the future of everything is, right? We are all a little bit different. So if we act like we are all the same and the plans do not acknowledge the individual differences in people, it's not going to help as many people. So I wrote that book. I saw how much it kind of pushed people towards this mindset. And I started asking myself different questions of, what is the best way to help people? Because I intermittent fasted for a long time. And a big change for me too was like how much it cut me off from the social side of health. There are a lot of dinners that I missed out, and I truly was having breakfast one day, or not having breakfast, with my son. I became a father in 2015. And, I was an intermittent faster for many, many years, like 5, 6 years by that time. And I'm sitting there watching him eat and I'm not eating. And I realized this is kind of dumb. Am I never going to have breakfast with my son? Right? It's like, is what I am gaining greater than what I am losing? And I remember telling to someone, like, this is what's the hard part about the nutrition, which can be very tribal. I'm telling other people who are like intermittent fasters and like, just move your eating window, right? Just move it up. Like you can eat from like 8 to 4. And I'm like, am I never going to eat dinner with my family? And maybe that wouldn't bother some people, but that bothered me. And I asked myself, I zoomed out what I'm trying to get people to do and asked myself, what do I want my life to look like? I want to eat breakfast with my son and still think that I can be healthy. I want to eat dinner with my family and not think that I'm doing something bad to myself, because like those social interactions, those moments are really key components of health. And if you stop looking at the fat loss and the muscle gain, which are things that people care about, and look at longevity and happiness, you look at the blue zones, people who live the longest, these type of social interactions are key components of that, right? So like when our healthy behaviors start eroding and cannibalizing other things, and there's a misalignment, you should ask yourself, how much is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Is like the incremental gain really that much better? And there are other ways to accomplish it, right? This idea of autophagy, which is so big from fasting. Well, autophagy is also accomplished by resistance training, right? So instead of like worrying about fasting, why not just resistance training? It's arguably even more than you get from fasting, and you're still going to get some when you sleep at night and you're not eating. So you start seeing things a little bit differently, so that you don't have to like fall in, because you don't get so narrow-minded, like that this is the only way to accomplish a goal. You ask yourself, I think, what is it that these habits are supposed to do to me or for me? And if you could do it sustainably, great. If you feel it's in conflict with something else, well, what are other ways? Because the beauty of health is like there are so many different ways. No different, like cold tubs are really big right now because of a dopamine surge. It's real, but there are a lot of different ways to get a dopamine surge. So if you want a cold tub, knock yourself out. But if you just hate it, never going to do it, there are other ways to still create that mechanistic change and get that health benefit without having to buy like, a bunch of ice or $20,000 cold tub.
But instead of blaming something or having a scapegoat, you found a solution to your, I guess, your plot, whatever problem it was. How important is that for everyone, like for everyone else? Like just to find the solution to whatever is causing their, let's say, diet problems or diet issues, or instead of just blaming what they're eating or how they're eating.
Yeah, I mean, I spend so much time with him because I run Arnold's daily newsletter, his Arnold's Pump Club, so I get a lot of insights from him. And Arnold's big thing that he learned from his father, it's the name of his next book. It's called Be Useful, right? And a lot of people, it's frustrating to run into barriers or things that stand in your way. But it's one thing to identify it and talk about it and be frustrated. It's another thing to do something about it. Right. And like no one ever becomes healthier by just complaining about what stands in the way. And I think it's really important to not blame things. It's okay to identify them, because identifying them helps us remove them. But the question is like, all right, if this is my enemy, if this is the problem, what is the solution? And look at it from truly trying to ask yourself, well, what is the cause? And part of the way to do that, which you talk about in the book, is this idea of inversion. So a lot of times when we try to set goals, we think about what we want to achieve because that's optimistic. It feels really good. We rarely think about what is going to cause us to fail. So what I tell people, if you want to find solutions rather than just identifying scapegoats, is invert the situation. Start at the end. Say it's 6 months from now and you have not achieved what you wanted to. What was the thing that stood in your way? And then identifying that and ask you, what would be a solution that would prevent that from being my outcome? And if you were truly honest with yourself, you're probably going to find things that stand in the way, right? It might be that like, oh, I'm not a morning workout person. I'm going to try and work out in the morning. I'm never going to work out. Or, I struggle with lunch and I'm going to still go out and eat like shit every day at lunch. And I need a better solution for that. We all have these kind of like bedrock behaviors that make it harder for us to achieve whatever goal it might be, whether it's get in the best shape of our lives or just making incremental changes. And the question is, how well can you take a pause and not ask what you want to achieve, but ask, what is it that truly stands in my way? What does it stand in my way? And how am I going to remove it? Then you can build a much more effective goal. Then you can build habits that help you achieve that goal so it becomes automatic. And you don't find yourself another point being like, ah, geez, I fell short of my goals again, right? It's a little bit more of a patient approach to creating a plan, but it's also way more effective, and it's going to give you insight into your behavior. It's going to give you insight into your lifestyle. And more importantly, it's going to give you freedom from, getting to the same point where you fail and you're like asking yourself, how will next time be different?
Question I do have is just how important is it to have Arnold Schwarzenegger write your forward as just being an endorsement of wellness for everything that you do?
It's surreal, right? I just, Arnold's a person who's been incredibly successful in really almost everything that he's done, right? Had failures along the way, but how he's reacted to those failures is a big part of what allows him to be successful. So to hear him and see him support the message and really buy into the habit and routine type approach, and one that has a little more flexibility, as he writes in the forward, right? He wanted to be the guy who could be the greatest bodybuilder in the world and still eat Kaiserschmarrn, which is his like favorite dessert that his mom would make for him, and cherry pie. Right. And a lot of people don't see that. But, even during contest prep, Arnold would go to the House of Pies with Franco, and they would eat pies to keep their sanity. And that would be like their way of having balance. And I think we get lost and think that we can't achieve these higher level goals without this amount of perfection. Whereas, finding a little bit of what makes you comfortable and finding a little bit of what challenges you is truly like the balance, right? Balance is something that a lot of people misunderstand. And I think what Arnold brings to that is telling people, listen, like your perception of what it takes to become incredibly healthy is probably a little bit warped. And if you can be a little bit kinder to yourself and shift your self-perception, you can be in a position to become a lot healthier than constantly beating yourself up. And that's the undertone of this. Arnold is famous for saying, where the mind goes, the body follows. But everything we do from a physical standpoint just focuses on the body with a complete disrespect to the mind. And I wanted to invert it. I wanted to teach people how to build a rock solid mindset, how to build unbreakable habits so that you could build the best body, the healthiest body that you want.
Well, just off that last question, you may have just already answered it, but what's the biggest lesson that you've learned from just being with Arnold, working with Arnold all these years?
Routines, habits, consistency, and make it fun. I can't stress that enough. Like if these plans are making you miserable, like Arnold still trains 6 days a week, right? He's 75 years old. That guy is smiling and joking around. We can't get into the gym without him cracking jokes. And I think that's one of the most intense people you've ever met. But if you go back and you roll the tape and you look at the videos, that guy was always smiling. Always. And he's like, this should be fun. This is your life. This is your health. This is your body. The things you're doing should not be miserable. And again, having fun and being challenged or challenging yourself can coexist. And I think, we associate health with misery, right? If something tastes good, it must be unhealthy, right? If I'm enjoying my workout, it's not pushing me hard enough. No. Like the things that allow you to push yourself even harder, to raise the ceiling, to break past barriers are the things that make it more enjoyable. So if you're looking for an entrance point, find the stuff that you find more enjoyable so that you can double down on that. And I think, beyond the habits and the routines and that iron mindset is there is this foundation of enjoyment, of happiness, and realizing that, people ask me why you train. It's you get one body. Right, you get one of these, and I think being aware of the limited time on Earth and the limited time that we have, and how much we should be enjoying this and making the most of what we're giving. It is a mindset that will serve us, both in the gym and far outside of it.